Hello and welcome to episode 77 of the Wine Educate podcast. I'm your host, Joanne Close, and today we're covering the topic of Super Tuscans. On Tuesday, we spoke all about Chianti and Chianti Classico. While I was researching this topic, the Super Tuscan topic came up, and it's really a fun one to go into, especially doing it side by side with the Chianti region. Both the Super Tuscan wines and Chianti are part of Tuscany as a whole. They're really not all that far apart. If you were in Chianti Classico and drove on down to Bolgheri, where the Super Tuscans are made, it's about 75 miles, for about 2 hours in the car because it's a bit windy and twisty. So not super far. But the two regions are so very different for many interesting reasons. So what is a Super Tuscan wine? All right. The definition of a Super Tuscan is a wine made in the area of Tuscany that is made with international grape varieties. When we say international grape variety, we mean that these are planted in other parts of the world, but have their origins from France itself. But now that the whole wine world is really just so international, maybe we should stop using that term. Oh, that's another topic for another day. A Super Tuscan is a wine made of primarily Bordeaux grape varieties. So that would be Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Not only that, these wines are usually aged in French barriques, so a lot smaller than the traditional larger Italian barrels, making a wine with a very distinct style. Now we know the definition of a Super Tuscan. Let's back up a bit and talk about the three main reasons why a Super Tuscan wine came into being. We're going to talk about the climate, then a little bit of historical context, and then mention the trailblazers, in particular one individual that really kickstarted this whole Super Tuscan movement. Bolgheri is a region on the Tuscan coast. So if you're driving down from Chianti, you're literally heading down from the hills closer to where the sea is. The elevation here is lower from base elevation to about 400 meters, and there is a strong Mediterranean influence. So it's warmer, and this area is great for these Bordeaux grapes because they get riper, they get the heat that they need, and the tannins are more plush. Chianti and Chianti Classico are further up. They're about 250 to 600 meters high, and with this influence of higher altitude and this greater diurnal range, this is good territory for growing a grape like Sangiovese, which we talked all about on Tuesday, because it needs this longer growing season. It is a grape that ripens later, and it needs time for its aromatics to develop. The tannins here are going to be firmer. The acidity is going to be nicely preserved by this higher altitude. Two very distinct regions making two very different styles of wine. Now for a bit of historical context. In the 50s and 60s, so came to an end the practice of sharecropping, this sharecropping system in Tuscany. Before, we had lots of large estates with wealthy local families, often many of them from noble families, and you needed a lot of people to keep up the vineyards. But without the sharecropping system, those people were gone and left a big void. There was no one there to tend to the land, and there was no money to invest. So the production really fell to the wayside. And there was a big drop in quality due to this lack of money and infrastructure. So this created a bit of a void, and land prices went down. And when that happens, it presents an opportunity for someone else, right? So there was outside investment that came into this region started to buy the land and to make grapes. Folks from Milan and Rome, and even further afield, further abroad, outside of Italy. These people brought in some money, some much-needed capital, but also brought an open mind as to what they could plant here. And they looked around and said, oh, it's a somewhat Mediterranean-influenced climate. It's much warmer than what's happening up in Chianti. And I think that the Bordeaux grapes would grow really well here. So they started to plant these sort of grapes and bottle them. But once you bottle something that doesn't fit in to any Italian wine law, what are you going to do? Well, you go to the very basic Italian wine law. So these wines in their early days, because they didn't fit into a category, were bottled as Vino di Tavola, which is the very bottom of the pyramid. But it didn't really hurt their reputation. It didn't hurt them at all. These styles of wines, these bottles, started getting a lot of recognition and became popular and started going for quite a bit of money. Hundreds of dollars a bottle. So cut to the Sassicaia story. So you might have heard of the wine Sassicaia. This is the original Super Tuscan. Let's talk about the story of this just a little bit. And we have a trailblazer here. The Marchese Mario Incisa del Rocchetta planted some Cabernet Sauvignon for fun. Just wanted to have a little house wine, planted some cab in the vineyard, and as early as the 40s was doing this, and bottled it up and called it Sassicaia. Well, originally this was just for friends and family, but then folks got a hold of it and started discovering how delicious it was, and it got super popular and became well known. This also helped to popularize this style of Super Tuscan wine in this region and inspired other folks to plant these Bordeaux grapes. These wines couldn't continue to be called Vino di Tavola forever. It's a bit embarrassing having a wine that comes from the very bottom of the wine law pyramid and that ends up selling for like $200. So they started a consortium and they got together to create a DOC. And such was the birth of the Bolgheri DOC. In 1983, this DOC was created, but initially only for the white and the rosé, which is a bit puzzling. But in 1994, it expanded and included these red wines and included Sassicaia as a specific subzone. But that wasn't good enough, and in 2013, Sassicaia got its own DOC, Bolgheri Sassicaia DOC. This is the only individual estate in Italy with its own DOC, so pretty special. How has this region grown? In the late 1990s, there was only 250 hectares planted in Bolgheri, but by 2020 was nearly 1,200 hectares and about 60 producers. So the Super Tuscans are still going strong. They now have their own appellation and are continuing to do pretty well on the market. I looked up just for fun to see what is selling for these days, and it looks like the current release is anywhere from $300 to $350, depending on the bottle shop. So, interesting style of wine. Not so far from Chianti itself, but with a very different style. Okay, I hope that helped you understand the style of Super Tuscans a little bit more. I'm going to start creating quizzes for my newsletter subscribers. If you haven't already subscribed, please go to wineeducate.com and click on the green newsletter sign up button. All right, friend, have a lovely weekend.